I really like Alice's Restaurant. Alice's Restaurant, for anyone not familiar with it, is a 1970s American country song, or folk song, or protest song. There's a lot of different genres you could put it in, by a dude named Arlo Guthrie. And the song is 17 minutes long, or longer, depending upon the version you find. And midway through this long, rambling story, the protagonist of the speaker of the song says something to the effect of, "But that's not what I came here to talk to you about. I came here to talk to you about the draft." And the whole song pins around that point, that everything in that first half of a lengthy song, which is like multiple songs worth of song, is all just preamble to give you added context for the second half of it, where the real meaningful nonsense comes up. It's a funny song. It's a great song. I really like it, like I said. But I fear at times that Alice's Restaurant too deeply infected the ways I choose to make a point. This is a video about the horror game Scarlet Hollow. Scarlet Hollow currently has a chapter available for free on Steam. Scarlet Hollow is a visual novel. It uses the format of the visual novel. It is atmospheric, creepy, well-written, and very thorough, and there's a whole bunch of different things I want to say about it after this point. But to get to the point I want to talk about, I'm going to need to talk about a lot of other stuff. Knowing that the longer a video is, the less likely you are to watch it through to the end, and other things that we'll talk about even later in this video, it does mean that I kind of feel like I need to punch you in the face with this point right up front. Scarlet Hollow is on Kickstarter right now. If you go and back the Kickstarter, you'll get 6 more chapters of this game, and it will be, hopefully, the complete story of this game. The people creating it have delivered in the past on long-form fictional material, such as books. And look, if you can make a book and you can make most of a visual novel, you can probably finish a visual novel. So I have a great deal of faith that the product that I played represents a product that can get made. No one seems to be swizzing anyone on this one, and the goals all seem reasonable. I am not being paid to do this. I literally was just asked by someone. They said, "Hey, if you have a slot free on October, can you look at this one?" And you know what? I didn't have a slot free on October, but they asked, and, well, I'm just a sucker for being asked to do things, which is a very strange behavior. Please don't exploit it. Normally when I do GamePile videos, though, it's not a simple, I liked it, thumbs up, go get it if you want it. I usually try and find something to talk about in the context of the piece of media that I'm at least vaguely aware of or have some appreciation of and understanding of, and, what puts this in a greater context. And sometimes that means using the Legend of Zelda games to talk about Marshall McLuhan, and sometimes that involves digging into long-form interviews with Japanese developers of Sonic the Hedgehog for the Dreamcast. There's a lot of different places I go with this kind of stuff. In this one, what happened is I played the game, and then I sat down and looked at the quandary of talking about visual novels on YouTube with my constraints. There is an entire division of YouTube for talking about a non-visual medium. BookTube is a thing, and it is a vast and sprawling leviathan of content that you can go on, and people will sit there in front of a camera, looking at the camera, and talk to you about the book they read. This gives you an animated, visually interesting thing to look at, and while that's happening, you can then put into context what they're describing. It gives you a facial expression, it gives you context, and it gives you a certain degree of rapport with someone, especially if he's built up over time. I, on the other hand, don't do that. I don't put myself on camera at all. There is one video on this channel, which is all the way back at the start, which is my Patreon introduction, and I don't even know it's listed, and it's just me waving at the camera, and my face isn't in it. I'm very much not comfortable about how I look on camera. And before anyone goes wondering about some deep existential reasons for this, it really just is, I don't look very good, do I? Anyway, the thing with that means that suddenly, when I make a video, I have to find things to stand in for the visual interesting elements. Sure, a lot of you listen to these things like they're podcasts, which, go for it, I totally support that. But if I have a visual presentation, I kind of should be using it, shouldn't I? Otherwise, YouTube is just being a bad version of another platform, and what I'm on YouTube for would be its content, its associations, its existing tool sets, because most of them are just garbage. Like, if your podcast is only on YouTube, your podcast probably isn't reaching as many people as it could, and it's probably not very good as a podcast. It's probably very approachable to a YouTube audience, but there are a whole bunch of stuff that podcast aggregators are useful for. Anyway, earlier this year I tried to talk about the game Traffic Department 2192. Traffic Department 2192 is a 1990s shareware DOS game, and the thing about it that makes it noteworthy beyond its, vaguely interesting connection to an artist called Owen Pallett is that the story elements of this game are told through what is essentially at the time a kinetic novel, which means this game, which was released in the early 90s on DOS shareware disks, it had in it a book's worth of text of just reading two characters back and forthing to tell this honestly quite sprawling and unmanageable and not particularly high standards, but still like very epic in scope story. Now, I wanted to do a video about that, but I realized that I would never get to be able to really show you the bits that are interesting because they're all text. Essentially, I would be running a YouTube video with a much harder to read version of text, which might get compressed even, making it harder still. And what am I going to do with for audio quality? If I'm talking to you while text is flashing on the screen, that text usually is going to work in contrast with what I say. It's a thing called the Stroop effect. You can't manage two different flows of information very easily compared to just one. What this means is that for heavily text media, you shouldn't really show it as video. It's not as helpful as using the visual elements for something else. Now, this is where we hit the problem with Scarlet Hollow. Scarlet Hollow is a visual novel. It is a really interesting visual novel. I find ideas in it really cool. But while I'm talking about it, I'm not going to want to flash up text on the screen or invite you to squint at the forms of text that are in front of you, which means this is what we get. We get slow pan and scans over artwork from the game with various pop-ups over it in the hopes that that will provide enough of an interesting visual to go with it. I'm explaining to you the ways that using a medium should be related to what that medium is good at. And thus we get to Scarlet Hollow as a visual novel. It is really easy to make a visual novel. Visual novels are fantastically well distributed as a genre. They range over as many different things as you can write a book about, and they range in quality all the way from the most basic stick figure kind of stuff to extremely expensive multi-layered affairs that would be conventionally not considered visual novels because there's a sort of divide between budget investments, and people talk about genre in a very weird way in this industry. Nonetheless, Scarlet Hollow is a visual novel that, using the Ren'Py engine, nonetheless takes the elements it is going to use and polishes them to a mirror shine. There is very little in the way of animation. Characters do not naturally or intuitively move around a lot. There is the shifting pose, the static image, a lot of classic visual novel stuff. But the minimal animation means that when the animation is employed, it has a really heavy impact, and it can make for long, slow, subtle moments as various components of the visuals are held still and then suddenly shift. It's really good for influencing and controlling mood. Another one of the things is, in a visual novel, you're often dealing with a problem of communicating with the player the importance of their actions and the opportunities presented to them. So, typically speaking, a visual novel, when you're presented with two buttons, open the door or don't open the door kind of thing, those two buttons don't tell you everything that's going to happen. They kind of tell you almost as little as they can. That can be a challenge when you're trying to make it so people feel that they are being dealt with fairly when it comes to the visual novel's effect. You can be left with a story that feels very unfair if all the times you try and do a nice thing, something terrible happens. And when you're using an interface that is minimal and text-based, there's a limit on just how much impact you can convey. Now, there are lots of ways to grapple with that, but in Scarlet Hollow, one of the things it chooses to do is it straight up just tells you, here are keywords to look for in the text. If you have this text entry because of a special ability you have, we will tell you that. If you have the opportunity to explore this further, we will tell you that. And this means that you have lots of different entries for things, and a fairly clear signal on when those things will or will not loop you back to where you started. It's a pretty good little game. The other thing is that it's just aesthetically really lovely. The visuals of a coherent style. It's set in the Appalachian area of the United States, which I understand is part of the South. There's a lot of other details about how it works in its space, things it does that you'd expect, things it does that you wouldn't expect. There is a very believable array of characters if you know of what the actual demographic makeups of the South are like, where there are people of color and there are non-binary people, and, you know, that kind of stuff that people normally go, why are they injecting politics by reflecting what's really here? It's a lovely thing to have the respect of horror, knowing that in your crew of characters, where anyone could possibly be shot in the face by an evil, dreadful monster out in the wilds, you are nonetheless not necessarily just having a standard grab bag of people to hate. Scarlet Hollow looks really good. I think the game will get made if the Kickstarter goes through. I enjoyed the time I had with it, and I was so interested in it, I finished it in one day and decided I had to make this video, which is why you're getting this. Definitely worth checking out. Go look at it on Kickstarter. I know I've already recommended a Kickstarter this month, but, you know, this is the life we lead. For now, I'd just like to mention one final thing, where in this game, your options for defining yourself are done at first very clearly and then very naturally. There are the things about yourself that set game rules, and there are the things about yourself that set how people react to you. The former are done up front. The latter show up later through conversation. A good visual novel is very thoroughly crafted, where everything that's going to come up is tracked back to the first point it could come up, where a well-edited and well-documented process results in characters being expressed consistently throughout. I think Scarlet Hollow has potential to be a really excellent horror visual novel, and you should definitely check it out.